Welcome to John's Tarot. Thank you very much. Welcome. Hey, I hope you're all having a great week out there, and welcome to John's Tarot. And I hope John's Tarot is catching on a little bit. My last series was on the disease of addiction, and I talked about that extensively. So I have to do a little follow-up on what comes after. Should you survive it, what comes after? And this has been my experience. Now, this isn't it must be like this. This is only my experience and how I experienced it and my perceptions of what I experienced. And for me, and I hate to use the term recovery process, but it's the only word available right now. It's been more than just behavior modification. I wish it was, for me, it was more than behavior modification. It was a deeper look inside at what made me tick, at habits I had, thoughts I had, actions I took, and it was and how did I respond to my environment? It was much deeper than just behavior modification. Let me switch over to my page. Here we are. So for me, the question was, I hope you enjoy the backgrounds, transformation or managed recovery. Now let me explain the difference. I just explained a little bit what was transformation for me. Managed recovery, maybe you're not that bad. Maybe you just can't stop drinking. And in general, your life is pretty good. You know, you got a job, you got a wife, you got some things to straighten out, but it's not that bad. You can get by with a little managed recovery. Managed recovery to me means, you go to a few of those meetings every week. You work a few steps every week, and you just do the behavior modification. For me, it had to be a transformation, a total transformation from the inside out. And that's what all these pictures are about, is spiritual transformation. I ended up changing my religion. At the time, I used to be a Christian Catholic. Some people say Catholics aren't Christian. Whatever. That's how I was brought up, and I morphed into Buddhism, and I morphed into Buddhism, and it was very helpful for me. It was very helpful in helping me discover who I am on the inside, because rather than in Christianity, it always seemed like something from the outside is going to come in and change you, and there's going to be some change. You're going to receive some blessings from God. But with the Buddhism, I was chanting to this. It's called a Gohonzon, and it's a higher life condition. It's the enlightened life condition of the Buddha, and you're merging your life with this higher life condition of the Buddha, and your Buddha nature emerges from within, and it's an entirely different process. And that's kind of what I went through, and I transformed. It wasn't just, I'm not the same person I was 37 years ago, and not in the least bit. I remember what that guy did, and he left a big mess, but I am an entirely different person today. So the first step in transformation. So if you're a person like me and you're totally messed up, and you realize everything you knew was probably things you shouldn't know about, and you picked, and a lot of my stuff had to do with family of origin, and I really had to dump it all and transform. But the first thing you need to do is really structure. And I didn't know about structure when I first started doing this. They told me, that you should get a get well job. I didn't okay, get well job. I got to work, and it didn't matter what the get well job was. And I think my first get well job was at a place called Kmart. And you believe it or not, God has a sense of humor. My first get well job was stocking the beer and wine section of the Kmart, and as well as the candy section. And I would work the register. I would do things like that, and that was my first job. And then after work, I would go to one of these meetings. And then after the meeting, I would go home, and I would maybe read a little bit of the text and go to sleep. That was pretty much my day. And then I would get up and repeat. I didn't realize I was building structure. I had something to do to fill up my time every day. On the weekends, I would probably go to two of those meetings. But I was, the kind of guy I was, I figured this was a safe place for me to be. So I built structure by having a place to go, having a job, going to those meetings. Because if you're a guy like me, that's where you needed to be, and talking to my advisor, I'll call him that. He was very helpful. His name was Tom, Tom C. And if he ever sees this, thank you, Tom. And doing those types of things and doing those types of things that they suggest. So I'm building a structure for my life, a structure for me to live in. And then I had to get used to that structure. And it took about really it took about 6 months for me to adapt to the structure. Not only was I doing behavior modification, not drinking, I was developing a sober lifestyle, a sober friends, sober activities, a whole sober life. That is your structure. The structure, and then you have to learn how to live within the structure that you've created. And some people do it differently. I also had my Buddhist practice, so that was part of my life. And those were the big things that were going on in my life. And then I had something happen to me with transformation. And this happened to me about 2 months in. And it continues to be something interesting for me. And I call it uh, the emergence of the observer. And I've talked about it in the past. I was my advisor had me kept on reading this section out of the recommended text, and had to do with somebody who was, if like I was a director in a play, and people just do as I thought they should do, everything would come out okay. And I couldn't understand why he kept on having me read this over and over. And then one day I was at one of those meetings and I was reading this, and it occurred to me that's what I've been doing. That's how I've been thinking. And that, how can I say this? And that this book was written by people with an alcoholic mind. And if you had been reading it like I'd been reading it and going, yeah, 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 yeah. So what else? I'm not surprised by any of this stuff I'm learning. It didn't shock me. I'm just like, yeah, yeah. So I thought like everybody thought that way. No, everybody does not think that way. Only alcoholics think like that. And if you're identifying with all the stuff in his book, you have the mind of an alcoholic. And I went, oh my God. Now that scared me. But what was important about this was the first time. I think the first, I knew I had a problem. I knew my behavior was an issue. Um, I knew I had some emotional stuff going on, but this is the first time I observed my thinking. That's why I call it the emergence of the observer. So the observer emerged, and I could see how I was thinking, and it was in this book, and it was laid out in front of me, and I realized that this was not a healthy thing to do. This was not a healthy way to be, and that was what I call the emergence of the observer. And then another milestone, I think, in early recovery. So you're developing all these things, a new lifestyle. You're observing your thinking, you're observing your actions, and that probably came a lot out of the Buddhism too, chanting to the Gohonzon and this higher life condition coming out of me and looking back within me instead of looking from the inside instead of looking from the inside out. And now I'm looking from the outside in, and that's how the experience was. And then another milestone, and I'll call it early recovery, is going to be the higher power issue. And I'm not going to tell anybody how to find a higher power. That is an individual journey for each person to figure out for themselves. But it is a milestone. This is an important tool that you have in the process. Now, there's two basic ways to go about it as I see it. And one way to go about it is the traditional higher power, or your higher power may be Jesus, which is just fine. Just fine. It may be, oh, I don't know. It may be in one of the Indian mythologies. It may be, I don't know, and I don't know much about the Muslim faith, but there's a God within the Muslim faith. That may be it. It may be your higher power. Or I had this advisor later on in the process. His name was Forrest. And Forrest was an agnostic. in regards to this issue, which was interesting. And I used to ask him, well, what is your, well, we talk about this issue about higher power. And an agnostic, how can I say it? An agnostic is somebody who says, I don't know. Is there a God? Is there not a God? An agnostic says, I don't know. I don't know. And a Gnostic, somebody who Gnosticism is somebody who says, I know. I've had an experience and I know. At least I know for myself. That would be Gnostic. But he, Force, was an agnostic. And for him, the higher power had to do with principles of the program, principles involved with the 12 steps and and those higher principles as a way to manage his life. So what happened to me was, it's a kind of a long story, and I've told it before, where I was chanting to my higher power in local homes at that time, and everybody was doing so well. And how come I'm not doing so well? And minimum wage jobs, behind on rent, no money, no. I'm staying sober, I'm staying clean, I have a sober lifestyle, but things aren't developing for me. And I was praying to my higher power that morning, and I said, where's mine? When am I going to get mine? Well, I got it that day. I left that minimum wage job to go to lunch, and the cops pulled me over for expired tags. And then they found out that I had an old warrant. So they arrested me on the old warrant, impounded the car, and took me to jail. And I'm behind rent. I've told the story. I'm behind rent at my apartment. I'm a month or two behind, and not that I'm trying, but I'm just not getting anywhere. And I go in front of the judge, and the judge gives me 30 days. Okay. So after my 30 days, I get out, and the landlady says, "Well, that back rent you owe me. If you pay in a couple of units, we'll call it even." And then the job I lost because I was away for 30 days, they sent me a check. The check was enough to get the car out of impound and to get registered. So, and then a guy I know in the program says that he goes, "Hey, I'm leaving for a year. If you stay in my house and paint the inside, you could stay there for free if you just paint it." Okay, and then I decided to move on to a second phase, but that was the test. I had always been big on bail me out, Busha. Busha was my grandmother. Bail me out. And I came to the point where I wasn't going to do that anymore. I'm not going to be bailed out. Either these principles of this program I'm involved with are working or they're not. And I put it to the test. And as far as I am concerned, it worked. I have a keen alcoholic mind, but I couldn't have put together anything like this for it all to come together in one piece like that the way it did. And that was my test. This is where the rubber met the road for me personally. And I think this happens to everybody in that first stage of transformation, where you're going to be put to a test. Are these principles you're learning real, or are you just fooling yourself? And it all kind of came together. So that is my first experience in transformation. Well, let's do a little tarot reading, and I'll do a little tarot, and I'll do a little tarot and runic reading. My ability to read tarot is a gift, an expression of divine love, and I'm here to share it with you in that same spirit. Let me see here. Okay, so somebody in their first year, or in early sobriety was just, I don't even want to talk about that. That was so bad, I never want to go through that again. Somebody in the first year, what do they need to know about transformation? That's a good question. They've chosen transformation rather than managed recovery, and they're both good. Actually, I think somebody in managed recovery, if they stick it out long enough, they're going to come to the same place. If they take a shot at the steps and do the things that are involved, you're going to come to the same place anyway. I know some people come to it a little differently. I'm a little different. I even I'm a little different from most of the people I know in recovery, just because I chose to go a little deeper. So, what does somebody know about the early stages of transformation? I'll give it a quick shuffle, throw out three cards, we'll throw some runes. What would somebody need to know about the early stages of transformation? They've chosen transformation. What do they need to know? I'll cut the deck. And what's my first card? The 10 of Wands. That's somebody who's working real hard. Yeah. And transformation involves working real hard. And then the second card is the 9 of Wands. And that's a veteran. And then the third card is the 5, is what it is, the 5 of Wands. Let's throw some runes on this. Odin Freya, please help guide this reading. Somebody who is in early transformation, what do they need to be aware of? First rune is Ingwas. So with this card, with the 10 of Wands, this is somebody who's working real hard. If you're in early transformation, you're working real hard. You got your nose to the grindstone. But it's important, this is a standard meaning, it's important that you take a rest now and then, and you look ahead. What is my goal? Where am I going? And just can't work yourself into the ground. You have to take a little rest, take a little time for meditation, a little time for gain some perspective on what you're doing. It's important, and it can be very intense, but it can be all consuming, and you need to sometimes you need to back off a little bit. And then the rune is called Ingwas, and that is the rune of the chrysalis. So you're emerging from a state where you could not see. And that's how I pronounce. That's how I look at it. You're coming out of a state where you could not see. Now you're coming into a state where things are being revealed. You're starting to see. You're starting to see your behaviors. You're starting to see your thinking, the emergence of the observer. You're starting to see how your actions affect other people, and you're starting to see, and it's opening up for you. That's what I mean by not working so hard, but taking some time to observe what is going on in your life. Let me see, let's draw another rune. And this rune will be for the 9 of Wands, which I always call is the veteran. And the rune is Langus. So the veteran is somebody, he's used to hard times, he's used to difficult obstacles. He's overcome many before he's taken a little break. You're in this journey of transformation. He is people who are doing transformation, who have come out of that lifestyle, are tough. They are veterans of hard time. They are veterans of difficulty, and they're looking at their goal, and they're saying, "This is worth fighting for. This is worth doing," and I've decided to do it. And that's the veteran. And the rune is Langus. You can't keep it on, but you can't keep the fire on full time. Your insight and learning will kind of wax and wane. And what I mean by that is you have periods of intense learning, of intense realization. And then you'll have periods where the tide goes out and not a whole lot is going on. You're learning about yourself. You're maintaining your lifestyle, but it slows down, and then it'll pick up again, and it happens in waves. And then the third card is the 5 of Wands. And 5 of Wands, early transformation. What does somebody need to know? Jira. The rune is called Jira. Jira is the rune of, let me do the card. The card is the 5 of Wands, has to do with competition. This is more of an inner competition. Do not compete with those around you. Those you do not, because those who do not, how does that go in the Tao Te Ching? Those who do not compete, and no one can compete with them. So you're competing with yourself. That's the only competition you need to know about. and that you need to work. Maybe you might need to push a little harder, especially if you find yourself like 6 months in and you're kind of slacking off. You need to pick it up. You need to pick it up and remain in the fight, remain in the game. And yeah, take a little break and then pick it up and come back in. And then the rune is called Jira, and Jira means it's planting, it's harvest. You're planting a seed. If you're doing the journey of transformation, first you plant the seed, and that's what this first part has been about, planting the seed. And then you have to take care of the as it germinates. You have to water the seed. You have to take care of the garden, and it will germinate into something of great value if you give it enough time. So I think for today we're going to wrap this up.
Goodbye, Professor Marvel, and thanks a lot.
Well, it was my pleasure. I hope you enjoyed today's podcast. And if you would like to be involved with this, you would like to tell me about your journey of transformation, or did you choose managed recovery? Let me know what you did. Send me an email and be part of the community where we have a worldwide community. I'm getting people from England and Japan and Hong Kong and China and all over the world. It's a small group, but it helps me if I know that you're there, you're listening, and you want to be a part of. I'd really be interested. So be careful, be cool, be kind. And until we meet next time, find courage, have faith, and I'll talk to you soon. Okay, bye-bye.